Shavua Tov, good morning, and welcome to our Sunday morning Parsha class, the Parsha of Chayei Sara. Parsha of Chayei Sara, which is almost, according to Rashi at least, a direct continuation to where we left off last week in the Parsha of Vayera, which was with the story of the binding of Isaac, the Akedah, as they say, where the story goes that Avram took Yitzchak for the Akedah, and when Sarah hears about it, she isn't even able to hear the rest of the story, how Yitzchak was saved, and she couldn't handle it as a mother, and she passed out, and she passed away. So that's the story of how Sarah passed away, 127 years old, and that's where we begin this week's parsha, the parsha of Chayei Sara, which opens up with the passing of Sarah and the burial of Sarah. Now, we're going to get back to the name of the parsha momentarily, but just to kind of go through the three main stories, three main themes of this week's parsha, on page 132 in the Gutnick Chumash. So the first section is where Avraham has to deal with his wife Sarah after she passes away. She needs a burial spot. And it turns out that this is the first time that Avraham, who is, I guess, the first Jew, and God promised him the land of Israel, it's the first time that he actually acquires, he buys, he purchases a piece of land in the land of Israel. And that is, of course, the Ma'aras HaMachpelah, the double cave, for whatever reason it was called, or referred to this way, in the city of Hebron. We know till today where it is. Many of us have visited Ma'aras HaMachpelah. In fact, don't ask me why, but just a few weeks, what was it? We were home for a few days, and I told my kids, let's do a puzzle. And we went to the shelf. We found the 1,000-piece puzzle of the Ma'aras HaMachpelah, and it took us a few days, and we finished it. And the whole time I was saying, you know what? If this turns out to be the first puzzle, the first 1,000-piece puzzle, which I've done many of them before with my kids, but if this is the first one that we do, that we don't miss even one piece, then we'll hang it up.
Then we'll
hang it up on the wall.
Okay.
Because in the past, we always do these 1,000-piece puzzles, and there's always one piece missing at the end. My kids, they're running, but this time we were able to do it. We had a skier in the middle because we found some puzzle pieces on the floor. But at the end of the day, it was completed and it's ready in the frame. And we got to just decide where we're putting it up. But we are, God willing, going to put it up in our house. A beautiful, beautiful 20 by 30-inch puzzle of the Ma'aras HaMachpelah. Avram purchases it for his wife. It turns out that this cave already has someone in there. There's two people are already buried in this cave. And who is that? Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve. Maybe it sounds like perhaps that the owners of this property weren't even aware of that. I don't know if they were aware of that, if they would have sold it. But that turns out that it was obviously it was a great buy. And the story goes where Avraham turns to the people of Ches, who were the ones living in Hebron at the time. And he said, listen, my wife passed away. I need to bury her. I'm willing to pay full price for this. And he tells her, I want this property. And he say, oh, Avram, don't worry about it. Just take it for free. It's an honor for us to give it to you for free. And Avram says, no. I don't want it for free. I want to pay for it. Let me speak to who's in charge. Ephron. His name is Ephron. He's in charge. Let me speak to Ephron. So he goes to Ephron, and everyone says the same thing. Avram, it's our pleasure. Just take it. Here you have it. And Avram says, no, I want to pay for it. And then he says, "Oh, you want to pay for it? Sure, we'll sell it to you." And he ends up selling it to him for full price, way over the market. It was 400 uh, 400 shekel kesef, 400 shekels, but it was like the more, it was like you could buy the regular stamps, you could buy the what's it called, the forever stamps. It was the money that was the currency that could have been exchanged in all different currencies. It was top dollar, in other words. But Avram was happy to pay for it. He purchased it rightfully. Purchased a piece of land, the property in Hebron, which is just the irony is that one of the few places that the Jewish people acquired in Israel, not by force, not by war, not by the UN, but actually paid for it, legitimately, legally acquired it, is the Ma'aras Machpelah in Hebron, and that's a very pretty contentious place today. Actually, just saw in the news this week that one of the Knesset members is proposing to kind of change the whole status quo with Ma'aras Machpelah, and today it's like divided. There's like one section where I think where Yitzchak is, that's where the Muslims kind of run, and the Israelis run the other sections. But he kind of wants to change the whole status quo, change the whole system over there. But either way, it's interesting. This is this week's parsha where Avraham purchases a plot for Sarah, and it turns out that's not just a plot for Sarah. Adam and Eve are already buried there. Avram eventually is buried there as well, a number of years later, near his wife Sarah. And then his son Yitzchak and his wife Rebecca, Rivka, they're buried there as well. And then when it comes to Yaakov's generation, the fourth generation, so Rachel, his wife, the wife that passed away first in Israel, ends up being buried on the side of the road in Bethlehem, and we've been there as well, next to Jerusalem. And for whatever reason, he did not take her, which wasn't that far away, just a few miles, to Hebron. So she passes away in Israel. His wife Leah, who actually passes away in Egypt, because she was with the family when they went down to Egypt years later. And the Torah doesn't specify when she passes away, but she passed away while they're in Egypt. And Yaakov leaves Egypt. It was during the first 17 years, because that's because Yaakov passed away within 17 years. And Leah was already buried before Yaakov was there. So Yaakov went back with Leah to Israel. Not everyone realizes this, right? That Yaakov, while he was in Egypt for 17 years, at one point he left Egypt, went back to Israel to bury his wife Leah. And where does he bury her? In that same spot, in Ma'aras HaMachpelah, in Hebron. And then later, when Yaakov passes away, his children, Joseph and the brothers, they, with great fanfare, they bring him up to Israel. And then we have the story where Yaakov's brother, Esav, says, "Hey, who said it's yours? Why? It's the last plot. We had our grandfather, Avram and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, and the last two, you already buried your wife there, but maybe the last plot is for me. And in fact, I'm the firstborn, so maybe I should get it." So they say, "Wait, firstborn, didn't you sell your birthright to your brother Yaakov?" Says, "I don't know what you're talking about." So they sent one of the sons, Naphtali, who was to run really fast. "Hey, you go to Egypt, go get the document." Yaakov actually had it written down on the document. Get the document. The says that Esav sold his birthright to Yaakov. So Yaakov gets the right to be buried in the last plot. And so he goes, Naphtali runs. And meanwhile, they're like, "Wait, what's going on over here? We're going to wait here all this time to get." And meanwhile, Yaakov passed away. His body's here waiting. The funeral is ready to go. We have everything ready. And we're just going to wait. So they did what they had. One of the grandkids, Yaakov's grandkids, came and he did what he had to do to Esav. And Esav ended up dying at that spot. And what the Midrash says, that he actually was buried. His body was buried because he collapsed basically right over there next to Yaakov. So that's Ma'aras HaMachpelah.
He's buried also in the cave?
Yeah, at least partially buried in this cave. Because that's the tradition. And for the most part, this cave has not been really a place that people went into because maybe of the great intense holiness. Although the Talmud, I think it was, talks about, I remember correctly, Yochanan ben Zakkai, but it might have been a different sage who actually did go in there and he saw some mystical things. In modern times, it's a place that we don't really go down to. We know where it is. We know where the opening of the cave is. Some people claim that they did go down there and they searched. Some people went down there and never came back up. Some people went down there and took pictures. So we do have some pictures of caves underneath the structure. The structure that we have today was built by King Herod in Israel during the Second Temple era, about 2,000 years ago. And he built this big structure, this big building on top of the cave. And that's where we go today, where we pray. I mean, the synagogues and whatever that goes on over there. That's all in the last, I say 2,000 years. Okay, so that is a little bit about the beginning of the Parsha. Avram buries Sarah. The next section of the Parsha is, well, now Avram has a son. He's about 40 years old. And he needs a shidduch. He has to get married. So what does Avram do? Avram says, listen, we live in Egypt. We live in Israel, which is a great place. It's a holy place. In fact, he lived in a holy place called Israel. Well, at the time it was Canaan. He has a son, Yitzchak, who God says he is just like he brought him up as an olah, sacrifice, an offering, even though, thank God, he wasn't actually brought as a sacrifice, but he was as holy as a sacrifice. In other words, Yitzchak was not allowed to leave Israel. So if Yitzchak had to go dating, had to find a shidduch, they had to come to him. He wasn't going to go out of Israel. So he had two options. Either he dates a girl, he marries a girl from Israel, or the girl from outside of Israel has to come to Israel to marry him. So Avram says, listen, I'm going to go with option two. And the reason for that is because the people in Israel were corrupt. It was like maybe like epigenetics or something, right? In their genes, they were just they weren't refined people. They had problem with their personality, with their character traits, and Avram wasn't happy with that. He didn't want that, to marry into that. On the other hand, he said, you know what? Let's go to extended family. We have cousins, we have family back in Haran, where we came from. The problem over there is that over there were idol worshippers. And Yitzchak should marry an idol worshiper. So Avram says, okay, we're going to find someone from family outside of Israel, but we're going to have them leave their place, leave all that idol worship behind, and come to Israel, marry Yitzchak, and live a righteous life. Turns out that they found Rebecca. Rebecca was a cousin. Her father, Laban, was a brother to Rebecca. I'm sorry. Father Laban was her brother Laban. Her father Besuel was a cousin with Sarah. So this was a cousin of Yitzchak, and she happened to be a righteous from birth. She wasn't involved with all the idol worship that was going on around her. So he sends his servant Eliezer to go and fetch Rebecca. He doesn't say Rebecca, but says a girl for Yitzchak. And the Torah goes into great detail about all that happened. It's supposed to take 17 days of travel. It ended up taking 1 day. And he meets Rebecca, and she's so kind to the camel. She's giving them water and offers Eliezer as well. Long story short, he comes back with Rebecca to Israel. And when they get married, it says that Yitzchak was comforted after his mother. That and Rashi says that now that he married Rivka, he saw some of the things that he had in the tent, the miracles, that the fact that the candle will be lit from week to week, and there was always like this cloud of Shekhinah hovering over the tent, and the special blessing in the bread and the challah. These mitzvahs, these ideas came back when we married Rebecca, and he was comforted, and they move on in life, seemingly, right? Now he's married, he's building his own family, which isn't so easy. They don't have children for many years, but that's the story of the second part of the Parsha, the story of Yitzchak's engagement and marriage. And then, towards the end of the Parsha, the next theme of the Parsha is, interestingly, after Sarah passes away, Avram is single. Avram is a widower, and he actually remarries. Who does he remarry? He remarries a woman by the name of Keturah. It's unclear exactly who Keturah is. Some say she was a woman Keturah. We don't know much about her. The Torah doesn't give us any really information about who Keturah was. But some say, actually, Rashi says that she was actually the same woman that Avram married earlier, the mother of Yishmael, Hagar, as we know her previously. The Torah refers to her as on a different name, mainly to talk about her virtues, how righteous she was, and he remarries her. Not as a full marriage, it was like a concubine, like similar to how he married her previously, but he remarries her and has children with her. So Avram was 100 years old when Yitzchak was born. And then this is years later, 40 years later at least, and he remarries and has more children. And the Torah mentions, I think, 6 children. Zimran, Yakshan, Medan, Midian, Mishbach, Shuach. And he had many descendants from her after he already married her previously and had Yishmael. And it says that Avram had, although he had many more children, he gave all that he has to Yitzchak. Yitzchak was his cherished child, and Yitzchak was really his inheritor, who inherited all that he had, I guess, both physically and also spiritually. The idea of being the first Jew and all the promises that God gave, that we have descendants like the stars of the sky and like the sand of the sand of the sea, and the fact that Israel will go to your children. This is really all passing through the lineage through Yitzchak. And then toward the end of the parsha, we have when Avram passes away, although it's out of order because Avram was alive during the story of the beginning of the story of Yaakov and Esau. They were about 13 years old when Avram passes away. But the Torah kind of finishes the story of Avram with Avram passing away. Okay, that is an overview of the parsha. Now, my question on this overview is the name of the parsha. We don't always talk about the name of the parsha. Seemingly, the name of the parsha is it's just kind of given, usually based on the first verse or two of the parsha. If you basically go through every name of a parsha, it's if you look at the first verse or a second verse, that is a word from that verse. Okay, you got to call it with something, right? You got to reference the parsha. So we do that.
Looking for you, Lance, but I didn't see it.
I got it right here.
So the name of this week's parsha is the parsha of Chayei Sara, which means the life of Sarah. The life of Sarah. Now, which parsha, I have to ask you, from the entire book of the Torah, which parsha would you say is like the opposite of the life of Sarah? Seemingly, this is the parsha that is all about after the life of Sarah, right? These 3 ideas, big ideas of the parsha. The first story is Sarah's burial. I mean, obviously, it's after the life of Sarah, right? You don't want to, say the story of you have a priest, you have a minister, you have a rabbi. It's the famous story. Maybe you heard it before. That they were talking about what would they want to be, what would they want said at their funeral, at their eulogies. You know the story?
Well,
so the first one says, the priest says, "Oh, he was such a righteous person, a man of God." So the second one says, "Oh, he's such a kind person, he cared about others, he helped so many people." The rabbi says, I want to hear them to say, "Look, he's moving." Right. So you're right. The burial happens after a person passes away. So the life of Sarah is while she's alive. Last week's parsha, she was alive, very much so. We hear her voice all over and over again. But in this week's parsha, she passes away right at the beginning of the parsha. Right, she lived 127 years old. But Thomas Sara, and Sarah passes away at a ripe old age. She was a righteous woman. Okay, I get it. And now we're talking about her burial, which is after she passed, after her life. So it's not the life of Sarah, it's after the life of Sarah. And then the story of Yitzchak getting married, and he's comforted after his mother. Also, seemingly now, we're talking about Yitzchak's life, right? He gets married, and his mother is not here. It's Rebecca in her place. Also, not the life of Sarah. And then at the end of the Parsha, where you have Avraham remarrying, and who does he remarry? He marries the woman that Sarah didn't like, right? The one that she sent away. He remarries Keturah, remarries Hagar, has more children. So seemingly the Parsha is like kind of, we're moving away from Sarah, and now we're talking about Avraham's life after Sarah. And nevertheless, the name of the Parsha, which is really indicative of what the Parsha is all about, is Chayei Sara, the life of Sarah. So you could say, okay, we just chose a word. It's the beginning of the Parsha. It's the second and third word, Vayiyu Chayei Sara, and this was the life of Sarah. Okay, so it's a name for the Parsha, but everything is exact. And usually we could see the theme of the Parsha in the name of the Parsha. So what is this name Chayei Sara? So I want to read two verses over here and give an interesting explanation based on a commentary called the Ksav Sofer. The Ksav Sofer lived in the early 1800s in Pressburg, in Slovakia, or Hungary, wherever it is today. He had a father, Rabbi Moshe Sofer, who is known as the Chassam Sofer. Great Torah giant, geniuses. They wrote a lot of commentaries on the Torah. Interestingly, his name was Avraham. Let me see, I wrote it down. His name was Avraham Shmuel Binyamin. Have three names: Avraham Shmuel Binyamin Sofer. At his bris. This is interesting. He was given the name Shmuel Binyamin. Two names, Shmuel Binyamin. When he was 6 years old, he fell ill. He was very, very sick. 200 years ago, if you're sick, 6 years old, it didn't have much medicine. The doctors were basically gave up on his life. They said basically, that's it. He's not going to make it. A 6-year-old. His father, a great rabbi, Rabbi Moshe Sofer, the Chassam Sofer, prayed and prayed and prayed, asking God for health to save his son. At one point, his father says, I was successful in securing for my son another 50 years. They changed his name, or they added a name from Shmuel Binyamin. They say they added Avraham Shmuel Binyamin. They added the name Avraham, which you may have heard this before, but sometimes there's this custom when someone's very sick, we change a name, or we add a name, and we say a little prayer that if there was a decree up in heaven that this person named, let's say Shmuel Binyamin, should pass away, well, now his name is Avram Shmuel Binyamin. It's a different name. It's a different person. We know that the name really is connected to our neshama, the type of energy that we get from our neshama. So, sometimes when people are in these situations, we add a name. It's not so uncommon. So they added a name, Avraham Shmuel Binyamin. And his father said, I think I secured through my prayers another 50 years. Well, how long did he live? He lived for 50, 60. He lived to be 56. Exactly 50 years. So that was pretty amazing. So he wrote commentaries on the Torah. So he points out seemingly an extra word that we find in the Torah. And I looked in others. I didn't see really other people talk about it that much. Nachmanides does. Well, let's read it inside. So we are in beginning of the Parsha, where Avram is speaking to the people of Ches about burying his wife, Sarah. Let's look at verse 4. Page 135. We're in chapter 23, verse 4. Now we can start from verse 3, I guess, the opening of the conversation. Avram got up from the front of his deceased wife. He spoke to the people of Ches, saying, okay, verse 4. Ger v'soishav anochi imochem. I am an immigrant and a resident among you. Well, if you're an immigrant, a resident, what's the difference? So Rashi says, he was saying basically, I am an immigrant, and therefore I'm asking you for help. But if you're not going to give me help, I'm a resident. In other words, I really own this place. God gave me this land. So either I'm going to play nice guy and just go through the proper channels and purchase a piece of land from you. But if not, I'm going to take it because it really belongs to me eventually. I'm a resident. So I'm an immigrant. I'm willing to go and pay for it, but I'm also a resident because God gave this to me. Okay. Please let me have some land for a burial ground among you. And I will bury my dead from in front of me. Which word seems to be superfluous? Which word seems to be extra? In front of me, exactly. The Hebrew is the last word of this verse. Milafonoi, in front of me. What is this emphasis? That I need to bury my dead from in front of me. I mean, of course, we're talking about your wife Sarah. We get it. He's trying. There seems to be like a message, something he's trying to mention or point out with the word milafonoi, in front of me. And he repeats this again later in verse 8. After they offer to give it to him for free, he repeats it again. Verse 8. And he spoke to them, saying, if you wish me to bury my dead from in front of me, right? Listen to me and let me speak to Ephron, the son of Soph. Again, he emphasizes that I'm burying the dead that is in front of me. What's this emphasis? So Nachmanides gives two explanations. That it was saying like, it's in front of me and I can't wait. It's not respectful. Like let's not push this off. Let's get this going. Let's get this confirmed. So that was like, it's in front of me. Or he was like kind of threatening. He said, it's in front of me. If you don't allow me to bury it, she's just going to be out here without being a proper burial. So it was like kind of putting pressure on them to let's work this out quickly. That's what Nachmanides says. But the Ksav Sofer says something very interesting. And it's a general message when it comes to life, to burial, for those of us who have buried some of our loved ones. He says, Milfanoi. Avram is saying, who am I burying? What am I burying? I am burying my wife, the dead person, who is in front of me. In other words, I am only burying a physical body. I'm not burying my wife. I'm not burying a person. The person lives on. The person is alive. The person's true identity, the person's true being, that is eternal. That never dies. That never ends. The body in front of me, the physical aspect, the body of the person, that we need to bury. And this is what Avraham was saying. I have a body, a lifeless body. This I need to bury. It's out of respect. We have to bury the dead. But that and only that is what I'm burying. I'm not burying Sarah. I'm not burying my wife because she lives on. And this kind of ties into what we're saying. Chayei Sara, the life of Sarah, doesn't have to be while Sarah is physically alive. Of course, then you're alive. You're alive in spirit and also in body. It's great. But after a person passes away, it's still the life of that person. Because the life of the person, the ideals, the ideas, the whatever the person lived for, that lives on. Now, where does it live on? It lives on within the closest family and friends. So it's really up to the family and the friends who are living physically after the person passes away to carry on that message, to carry on the life of the person who passed away. And this is what it means, Chayei Sara, the life of Sarah. And we see this in this Parsha very clearly, how the ideas that Sarah stood for actually does play out in this week's Parsha. It's really all about the life of Sarah. Yes, after she passes away, but what she truly stood for is really emphasized in this week's Parsha. What does Sarah stand for? And we see this in contrast to Avram himself. Because Avram, as his name was changed by Hashem, Av Hamon Goyim. He was the father of all the nations. Yeah, we call him Abraham Avinu, Abraham, our forefather, but he was also thinking about others, right? He had Ishmael, he had other nations from him. He taught monotheism not just to his family, but to the entire world, the entire, right? Sarah, as a Jewish mother, first and foremost, what she was thinking about is what? Her child Yitzchak. She also spoke to other women, but first and foremost, she was thinking about her son Yitzchak. And we see this in her lifetime as well, right? Where she's very protective over Yitzchak, over Yishmael, is having bad influence, sending Yishmael away. It's all about Yitzchak. Everything, right? She's really focused on the Jewish family, Yitzchak and his descendants. This is what Sarah was really thinking about. So she passes away. First thing in the Parsha is Avram acquires a piece of the land of Israel. The land of Israel that was promised to Abraham. To go to who? To all of his descendants? Or to his descendants from his son Yitzchak? The Jewish people. They will eventually get the land of Israel through Yitzchak. So that was really what Sarah was saying. Abraham was saying, okay, I have so many children, not all my descendants will have the land of Israel. Sarah's son, Yitzchak, he and his descendants will have the land of Israel. The first time that a piece of land is purchased, a property is purchased for Avraham in the land of Israel is for who? For Sarah. Life of Sarah. This is what she stood for. The next part of the parsha is the story of Yitzchak's engagement and marriage. And what does it say in the conclusion of the whole story, as we pointed out before, that now that he married Rivka, he was comforted after his mother. So Yitzchak now is married, and now with the ability to raise his own family, continue on with this blessing and this promise from God that Yitzchak will have Avram's descendants will come through his child Yitzchak. Now that he's married, he's comforted after his mother. Rivka has a lot of the qualities that Sarah had, and now we could continue on with the next generation. Again, what Sarah stood for, having Yitzchak and having children from Yitzchak. This is what it's all about. Again, the life of Sarah is seen after she passes away through Yitzchak's marriage. And then even the last part of the Parsha, where Avram remarries Hagar, which seemingly Sarah maybe wasn't so excited about that. But what's the conclusion at the end of this whole story? That Avram has multiple children from the second marriage. And then what does he do? He gives all that he has to who? To Yitzchak. Again, that's the life of Sarah. Avram had many, many nations. He had 6 new children from Hagar. He had Ishmael from Hagar previously. But Sarah was thinking about Yitzchak. And the life of Sarah is that after Avram has so many more children, he gives all that he has to Yitzchak. So here we see that the Parsha, which seems to be like after the life of Sarah, it's like Sarah's passes away, now we move on. On the contrary, this is really where the life of Sarah was really all about. And that is, I think, something that we could take to heart in general when we also have in our lives. First of all, what do we stand for while we're alive? And also the people who pass away in our lives, what did they stand for? And how we could continue their life even afterwards by fulfilling their wishes, living up to what they wanted from us or what they dreamed of. And that allows them to be present in our lives, even years perhaps after a person passes away. Something like we have obviously a beautiful tradition that we say Kaddish, for example. See, something so simple like that, saying Kaddish. You think of someone like some people they say Kaddish for a great-grandparent, right? Think about this great-grandparent who passed away perhaps 50, 60, 70 years ago, right? How many people are remembered by their grandchild or great-grandchild, or sometimes even a great-great-grandchild? How many people are remembered so many years after they pass away, and they're coming to a synagogue and they're saying a kaddish, they're mentioning the name, they're saying a l'chaim on some schnapps, and they're going to their grave. It's like most people, unless you're some like big celebrity in history, are forgotten, right? You have your children, maybe a second generation, but eventually it's like who remembers people who lived 500 years ago? We don't know who they are even. We don't know who their descendants are. We don't know anything about them, right? They lived a life and they were so present at the time, but hundreds of years later, they're totally forgotten. But if the children, grandchildren, great grandchildren, they're continuing on that legacy, coming to Sudashi Kaddish, for example, that's like a beautiful thing. They say like when someone passes away, the Rebbe had a beautiful letter to a woman her husband was killed by I think like a rocket or something. I'm not sure what year. It's probably in the 60s, 70s. There was some incident in Israel. The husband passes away, a young man, and she was devastated. So the Rebbe wrote to her a letter and says that if you knew that your husband or your husband, I think it was alive, but he was just overseas. He was far away. And you couldn't call him on the phone, you couldn't see him in person, but all you could do is send packages. Send love packages, send care packages. You can send a note, you can send some candy, some chocolate, you can send whatever, your favorite, whatever it is, right? Just send packages. You may not hear back from them because they're so far away, but they receive whatever you send them. What will you do? I'll be very happy. I'm happy for them that they're accomplishing whatever they're doing in this faraway island. And I'm more than happy to send them packages as often as I could. And he says, well, that's what happens when a person passes away. They are still alive. Spiritually, they're still alive. They're in a faraway island somewhere. They're in a different reality. But we send them packages. We send them a Kaddish, that's a package. We send them a little mitzvah. We give a little donation in their honor. We sponsor Torah class in memory of my great uncle. It's a package. It's a little, and they receive it, and they say, "Oh, wow, amazing! So many years, no one forgot me. No one forgot me." I was talking to someone who ended up told me that he spent 5 years in prison. So 5 years in prison. He said the worst thing that he had in prison. It wasn't easy. He was in solitary confinement for months at a time. He had a difficult 5 years in prison. But he said the most difficult experience that he had in prison for 5 years is that his family abandoned him and he got not one visitation. Not one visitation in 5 years. Not a family, not a friend, nothing. He initiated some calls to his family members, but no one came to visit, even though they were able to from time to time. So for 5 years, that no one cares about me. So that was the worst. That really till today he has a hard time getting over it. Even though he's closer with his family, he changed his life. He's a whole different person now. But the fact that for 5 years no one came to visit. A person passes away, they want visitors, not physical visitors. They want people to live down here for many, many more years, but they want the package. They want someone to say, "Hey, Uncle Henry, we're thinking about you," in a positive way. They say the story where someone passes away, a very wealthy man, and they're reading out the will in court. And he says, the will goes, "Okay, to my dear wife, Rebecca, for you, I'm leaving you my house, a beautiful, beautiful big mansion. That's going to you. And to my son, Josh, for you, I have the 401k, all the, the thousands of dollars over there, that's going for you. And to my daughter, Rachel, to you, I have my 3 cars in my lot, going on and on and on, to all his family members, everything that they're receiving, all his wealth." And then he says, "And to Uncle Henry, who you've always been bugging me that I should mention you in my will. Hello, Henry." Okay, but on a serious note, yes, sending packages. In other words, that we are living your life here, what you stood for, doing a mitzvah, that is a package to them, saying hello, and it's not just saying hello to them, but it's bringing them down here and keeping them alive here in this physical world. And that's really what life is all about. Sometimes it's more noticed after a person passes away. We say, "Wow, what this person lived for is so much alive here today, perhaps even more than before." So just to conclude with the story that happened just over a year ago, after the terrible atrocities of October 7th of Simchas Torah of last year, where there was this little kid, Arihel Zohar, his name was. He was a few weeks shy of his bar mitzvah. He was 12 and like 11 months, a few weeks before his bar mitzvah. And he was from the town, the small village near Oz, which is right there next to Gaza, and one of those places that really got hurt very, very strongly. And he wasn't home at that early hour in the morning. He was on his bike, I think. He was riding in the neighborhood or whatever it was. He was just out there. And suddenly the rockets and everything starts happening, and he's all lost. He doesn't know what to do. So he quickly runs into the first house, the first building or house that he was able to get to, which turns out to be actually like a house or a structure, a building of some type of security place. I don't know if it was a police station or whatever it was. It was a pretty secure place. And the guy brings him in and says, "Here, you stay here in the safe room in this place. I'm actually going out to see what I could do to help." So he was actually there alone for hours on end. And eventually he comes out, and the worst that he could imagine actually did happen, where he lost his entire family. He was the only member of his family, of his immediate family, who survived these atrocities. And he was taken in by his grandparents from, I think, Rishon LeZion, who took him in, and now we got to celebrate his bar mitzvah. I mean, it's a terrible time to celebrate bar mitzvah. He just lost his whole family. And he tells his grandfather, he says, "My father promised me a pair of tefillin. He actually bought a pair of tefillin for me." I'm sorry. He actually had in his family a pair of tefillin that he was going to give me, like that was passed down through a few generations already, and he had it in his house. A pair. The chances of it that it survived because their house was burnt down. But let's see, could we obtain these tefillin? And at that point, Nir Oz was still was still closed off, where people weren't allowed to go back in. But they made a special request, and Zaka, together with the IDF, they made a special operation almost to get into the house, to search the house, and lo and behold, although the house was basically burnt down, the tefillin survived. There was actually a picture of the tefillin that was like all burnt from the side, but the tefillin itself were kosher. Like the bags were burnt, the tefillin were survived, and he was able to put on these tefillin at his bar mitzvah. And the grandfather spoke at the bar mitzvah and says, like, these are, the grandfather was a Holocaust survivor, and he says, "I went through a Holocaust, and eventually I came to Israel, and all I hoped was that my children don't have to witness what I witnessed. And unfortunately, my children did have to witness that, and they were killed, and my grandson had to experience what he's experiencing. But one thing that we do have that will never be taken away from us is tefillin. That mitzvah, that connection, that bond that we have with God, that is something that can never be taken away from us. And that is something that is multi-generational. That is something that keeps us alive from generation to generation. When the person passes away, they pass away, but what they stand for is alive. Tefillin, which represents our connection with God, that is something which is alive no matter what our enemies try to do to us. So I'll leave you with that. Chayei Sara, the life of Sarah. We should live our lives while we're here, make it meaningful. For those who have passed away in our lives, live their lives, what they stood for, and bring them into our lives and make it meaningful. And we end with a little prayer that we're not going to have to talk about a person's life after life, because we're all going to live for eternity with the coming of Mashiach, maybe today. I'll leave you with that. Have a Shavua Tov. Thank you for joining us this morning. Take care, everyone. Good to see you all. And we shall see you next week. Take care.